The storm hit without mercy, which Era thought was fitting. Everything in her life happened without mercy. Rejection, exile, and now apparently dying alone in the mountains. She'd been walking for 7 hours since the Shadowmere pack had cast her out, her threadbare cloak doing nothing against the wind that cut through her like silver blades. Her silver-white hair, so pale it looked like moonlight frozen in time, whipped around her face in vicious gusts. Her skin, already naturally luminous enough that people whispered she was touched by death, had taken on a grayish pallor from the cold and exhaustion. Her storm-gray eyes could barely see through the driving snow that seemed determined to bury her alive. Era knew she was going to die. The rejection ceremony had been this morning, and by tonight she'd be a frozen corpse in the wilderness. There was a certain poetry to it. She supposed born cursed, died alone. A life bookended by rejection and fear. She'd been found abandoned at the Shadowmere Pack's border when she was a newborn, left during a blood moon. The pack healer said she'd been wrapped in a tattered cloth with nothing else. No note, no explanation. Just a pale baby with silver-white hair left in the darkness like an offering someone wanted the night to claim. Too pale, too strange-looking, too much of a reminder that not all children were blessings. Some, the whispers said, were omens. The pack had taken her in out of obligation to Moon Goddess Law, raising her in the Omega House with the other unwanted wolves. She'd never known love, never known true belonging, never known anything but the certainty that she was different, and that difference was dangerous. The other orphaned Omegas had at least had stories about their parents' tragic deaths, territorial disputes, reasons why they'd been given up that made sense. Era had nothing but questions no one could answer and an appearance that made people uncomfortable. They called her Death's Daughter, the Cursed One, the Blood Moon Child. Some wouldn't meet her eyes, as if looking directly at her might transfer her bad luck. When she'd presented as an Omega at 16, there'd been a brief, flickering moment of hope. Omegas were valuable, even strange-looking ones. They could bear strong pups, could soothe pack tensions with their calming presence, could be useful in ways that transcended appearance. But as the years crawled by and no one claimed her, that fragile hope had died a slow, agonizing death. At 24, she'd been the oldest unclaimed Omega in the pack, an embarrassment they couldn't quite figure out what to do with, a living reminder of their charitable obligation gone stale. Then Damien had solved their problem. Damien, a mid-ranking warrior who'd been assigned to bond with her because no one else would volunteer. He'd looked at her like she was rotting meat. At their bonding ceremony, in front of the entire pack assembled under the full moon, he'd taken one look at her silver-white hair, her luminous pale skin, her storm-gray eyes that reflected the moonlight, and he'd publicly rejected her with theatrical disgust. "I won't bond with an abomination," he'd said, his voice carrying across the ceremony, clearing with cruel precision. "She's unnatural, cursed, a walking omen of death. I want a real Omega, not whatever this thing is. Look at her, she looks like a corpse, like death itself decided to walk among us. The moon goddess must have made a mistake creating her. I refuse to taint my bloodline with this curse." The pack had agreed enthusiastically, their relieved murmurs spreading like wildfire. Finally, someone had said what they'd all been thinking. Finally, they had permission to be rid of her. The Alpha had banished her immediately, not even giving her time to gather proper supplies or say goodbye to the handful of Omega House caretakers who'd shown her basic kindness over the years. Just a thin cloak, the worn clothes on her back, and orders to be gone before nightfall or face execution for trespassing on pack lands. 7 hours. That's all the head start they'd given her, before they'd likely send warriors to ensure she never came back. So Era had walked into the storm, into the mountains, into what she knew would be her death, and she'd made her peace with it. At least she wouldn't have to see that look of disgust in anyone's eyes ever again. At least she wouldn't have to pretend she didn't hear the whispers, didn't feel the way people moved away from her like her curse might be contagious. At least, finally, it would be over. Era's legs gave out for the 3rd time, and this time she wasn't sure she could get back up. The cold had stopped hurting an hour ago, which she knew from her Omega House healing training meant she was dying. Hypothermia's final stage when the body stopped fighting and just let go. Her fingers were numb, useless things at the ends of her arms. Her feet had lost all feeling. Even her thoughts were sluggish, wrapped in cotton and fog. Maybe she should just lie down in the snow. It would be peaceful, quick, better than stumbling forward into nothing. But then she felt it. A pull, not physical but undeniable, like invisible hands wrapping around her chest and tugging her forward with gentle insistence. It was the same instinct that had warned her when pack members were in foul moods. The same whisper that had told her which routes through the territory were safe and which weren't. These instincts had kept her alive for 24 years in a pack that wanted her gone. She'd learned to trust them, even when they made no logical sense. The pull led her away from what little path she'd been following, toward what looked like sheer cliff face, barely visible through the driving snow. Ira wanted to resist. There was nothing there, just rocks and certain death, but her feet moved anyway, following that insistent tug even as her rational mind screamed that she was wasting her last reserves of energy on nothing. Then the cliff face opened up. Not literally, but the angle shifted as she got closer, revealing what her snow-blind eyes had missed. A gap in the stone, an entrance to something carved into the mountain itself. Ancient ruins, crumbling and half-buried by centuries of weather, but still standing, still offering shelter. Relief hit her so hard she nearly collapsed right there. Era stumbled through the entrance into a vast stone chamber that had once been something grand, a fortress maybe, or a temple. The wind's vicious howl cut off immediately, replaced by eerie silence. She was out of the storm. She might actually survive the night. She sank against the nearest wall, shaking so violently her teeth chattered loud enough to echo. Just rest. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel her fingers again. That's when she heard it. Low, guttural growling from deeper within the ruins. Not one voice, multiple. Pained, desperate. The sound of predators suffering. Every survival instinct Ira possessed screamed at her to run. Injured animals were the most dangerous, unpredictable, and vicious. Whatever was making those sounds could kill her without effort, especially in her weakened state. She should leave. Should take her chances with the storm rather than face wounded predators in an enclosed space. But that other instinct, the one that had led her here, the one that whispered things she didn't understand, pulled harder. And beneath the growling, beneath the sounds of pain, she felt it. The sensation she'd always had around injured creatures. The healer's awareness that told her something was dying and needed help. Her Omega House training had been minimal, but they'd taught her basic healing because even cursed Omegas could be useful when warriors came back bloody from border disputes. She knew wounds, knew suffering, knew death. And whatever was deeper in these ruins was dying. Era pushed herself off the wall, her body screaming in protest. This was insane. This was suicide. But her feet were already moving, following that pull, following the sounds of agony, following something she couldn't name but couldn't ignore. She ventured deeper into the darkness, toward the dying predators, and prayed to the moon goddess who'd supposedly cursed her that this wouldn't be how her story ended. The chamber opened into something that had once been a great hall, now half collapsed and frozen. And there, arranged in a perfect defensive formation despite their obvious agony, were 12 massive wolves. Era stopped dead, her breath catching in her throat. They were enormous, easily twice the size of normal pack wolves, with distinctive gray and white fur that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light filtering through cracks in the ancient stone. Their positioning was unmistakable, a tactical circle with the largest wolf at the center, each animal placed to protect the others even while grievously wounded. This wasn't random, this was elite military training maintained even in extremis. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She knew what they were. Everyone in the territories knew the stories. The Praetorian Guard, the legendary warriors who served Alpha King Kirin Volkov, the most powerful and ruthless ruler in the Northern Dominion. 12 wolves who moved as one, who'd never lost a battle, who were spoken of in hushed, fearful reverence around campfires. They were supposed to be invincible. They were dying. Era could see it clearly now, deep claw marks raking across ribs and flanks, bite wounds that had torn through muscle, and worse, the telltale black veins spreading under their skin like dark lightning. Poison. This had been a coordinated ambush, designed to kill. She should run. Should flee back into the storm and take her chances with hypothermia, rather than risk being found interfering with the Alpha King's personal guard. Kirin Volkov was known for his merciless justice. Execution would be the kindest outcome if his warriors thought she'd had anything to do with this attack. But they were dying, right in front of her. And she had healing knowledge, limited as it was. "I'm going to help you," Era said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper in the vast space. She bowed her head in submission, making herself as non-threatening as possible. "If you'll allow it. I'm a healer. I can try to—" The largest wolf's head lifted. He was massive, clearly the alpha, with a coat of silver gray that darkened to charcoal along his spine. His eyes were amber gold, burning with intelligence and something that looked almost like relief. Even wounded, possibly dying, His presence was overwhelming, the kind of power that made her Omega Wolf want to roll over and expose her throat. He made a sound, low in his chest. Not a growl. Something almost welcoming. Permission granted. Another wolf, slightly smaller but no less imposing, shifted his position. His fur was lighter, more silver than gray, and his eyes were sharp and assessing. Even injured, he moved with predatory grace, positioning himself between her and the alpha protective, but not aggressive. A beta, she realized. The squad leader. The message was clear. She could approach, but she was being watched. One wrong move and protective instincts would override even mortal wounds. Era stepped forward on shaking legs, her own hypothermia forgotten in the face of this impossible situation. 12 legendary warriors, dying from ambush. And somehow, inexplicably, the moon goddess or fate or whatever had pulled her here had led her straight to them. Okay, she breathed, assessing the carnage with a healer's eye. Okay, I can work with this. I can... Her voice cracked. There was so much blood. So much poison. I'll do everything I can. I promise. The alpha wolf's amber gold eyes never left her face, and in them she saw something that made her chest ache. Hope. Era moved through the wolves with desperate efficiency, her healer's training overriding her exhaustion. 4 had severe lacerations that were still bleeding, deep claw marks that had torn through muscle and would be fatal without treatment. 3 showed the advanced stages of poison, the black veins spreading toward their hearts like creeping death. The remaining 5 were critically exhausted, their breathing shallow and labored, and none of them could shift back to human form, which meant their energy was so depleted they couldn't access that most basic of abilities. They were all dying, just at different speeds. I need supplies, she muttered, more to herself than them. Herbs for the poison, something to start a fire. That pull thrummed through her again, tugging her toward a collapsed section of the fortress. Era followed it without question now, scrambling over rubble until she found a small chamber that had somehow remained intact. And there, preserved by the cold and dryness, was a healer's cache. Her hands shook as she gathered what she found. Dried herbs in clay jars, ancient but still potent. Strips of cloth that could serve as bandages. A fire-starting kit with flint and steel. Clay vessels for mixing remedies. Someone had stored these here long ago, perhaps for exactly this purpose. Back in the main chamber, Ira's frozen fingers fumbled with the flint. 30 agonizing minutes passed as she struck sparks that wouldn't catch, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the tools. The wolves watched in silence, some barely conscious. Finally, mercifully, a spark caught on the dried moss she'd found, and a small fire flickered to life. Working by firelight, she created makeshift antidotes using techniques. Old Mara from the Omega House had taught her crushing nightshade root to counteract wolf's bane poison, mixing it with yarrow and moonflower to neutralize the toxins. She forced the paste between the jaws of the 3 most poisoned wolves, praying to the moon goddess it would work. Then she moved to the bleeding warriors, tearing strips from her own already thin shirt to bind their wounds. The cold bit at her exposed skin, but the wolves needed the cloth more than she needed warmth. She positioned them closer together, arranging them so their body heat would combine, using every trick she'd learned about cold weather survival. The alpha wolf had been watching her work, never closing his eyes despite obvious pain. When Era finally approached him, she saw why he'd been hiding a deep flank wound, infected and seeping, probably from taking a hit meant for one of his warriors. "Stubborn alpha," she scolded gently, carefully cleaning the wound with water heated over the fire. He growled softly, but didn't pull away. "You're no good to your pack, dead from pride. Leaders need to accept help too." His amber gold eyes met hers, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, recognition. She worked in silence, treating his wound with the same care she'd given the others, ignoring her own exhaustion and the way her vision kept blurring at the edges. By the time she finished, dawn was still hours away, and she'd used every scrap of her knowledge. The fire burned low. The wolves breathed easier, and Ira collapsed against the nearest wall, knowing she had to stay awake, had to keep watch, had to keep the fire going, but her eyes were already closing. Ira jerked awake as the fire crackled, realizing she'd nearly dozed off. Outside, the storm had found new fury, wind howling through cracks in the ancient stone like the screams of the damned. She couldn't sleep, wouldn't sleep. These warriors needed monitoring. Infections could spike, poison could resurge, wounds could reopen. She had to stay awake. So she began to sing, quietly at first, almost under her breath, an old healing song Mara had taught her. Something about the moon's light guiding souls through darkness. Her voice was rough from cold and disuse, but steady. The nearest wolf's ear twitched, and she saw his breathing ease slightly. She fed more wood to the fire, checked bandages, and sang another song, then another. Lullabies the Omega House caretakers had sung when she was small. Work songs she'd learned in the pack kitchens. Traveling ballads about wolves who'd journeyed far from home. Anything to keep herself awake, to fill the oppressive silence, to comfort these dying warriors who couldn't speak. One by one, the wolves shifted closer to her. A massive gray head rested on her lap, too heavy but somehow comforting. Another leaned against her side, sharing warmth. She stroked their fur absently as she sang, marveling at how soft it was despite the blood and dirt, how they trusted her enough to let their guard down even slightly. The alpha never closed his eyes. He watched her throughout the night, amber gold gaze tracking her every movement as she changed bandages, administered more medicine, kept the fire fed. A leader who wouldn't rest until his pack was safe, even if it killed him. "You're an extraordinary leader," Era told him quietly during a lull in her singing, her hand gentle on his massive head. "They trust you completely. They're lucky to have you." His tail moved slightly acknowledgement, perhaps. As the night dragged on and exhaustion crumbled her carefully maintained barriers, Era found herself talking to them. Really talking, saying things she'd never said aloud to anyone. "I grew up believing I was cursed," she whispered, her fingers carding through silver-gray fur. "They called me Death's daughter, said I was touched by darkness, that the moon goddess had marked me as wrong somehow. I watched other Omegas get chosen, get loved, get families. I remained unwanted, always unwanted." The wolf in her lap made a soft sound, almost like disagreement. "This morning, gods. Was it only this morning? Damien rejected me in front of everyone, said I was an abomination, that I'd taint his bloodline with my curse. They were all relieved, I think. Finally had permission to be rid of me." Her voice cracked. "So I walked into the storm. Wanted to die. Expected to die." She looked around at the 12 massive warriors surrounding her, at the Alpha, who watched with those knowing eyes. "But then I found you. And I couldn't just let you die. Even knowing you're the Praetorian Guard, even knowing your Alpha could execute me for this, I couldn't walk away." Tears burned her eyes. "At least this way I won't die alone and useless. At least my last act was saving lives instead of being a burden. At least I mattered, even if just for one night." The Alpha wolf shifted, pressing his massive head more firmly into her hand. The others moved closer, surrounding her in a circle of warmth and fur and silent acceptance. And for the first time in her 24 years, Era didn't feel cursed. She felt needed. Dawn crept through the cracks in the stone fortress like a hesitant visitor, gray light gradually replacing the fire's orange glow. Era blinked against the brightness, her body aching from a night spent sitting upright, keeping watch, keeping the fire fed, keeping 12 legendary warriors alive. And they were alive. All of them. The black veins of poison had receded, fading to faint traces under fur. The bleeding had stopped, wounds beginning to knit with the accelerated healing of strong wolves. Their breathing was deep and steady, no longer labored. Even the most critically wounded were showing signs of recovery. Relief hit Era so hard she swayed where she sat. She'd actually done it. Against all odds, with nothing but expired herbs and Omega House training, she'd saved the Praetorian Guard. She was checking the last bandage, her movements slow and careful, when the air itself seemed to change. Pressure built in the chamber like the moment before lightning strikes. Every hair on her body stood on end. Then came the surge of alpha power so massive, so overwhelming, that her Omega wolf responded instantly and instinctively. Her head bowed, her throat bared. Submission, automatic and complete, to a dominance that felt like standing before a force of nature. The 12 wolves were shifting. Era had seen shifts before, but nothing like this. The transformation was breathtaking, bones cracking and reforming with sounds that echoed through the chamber, fur receding to reveal skin, forms expanding and reshaping, magic and nature combining in a display of raw power that made her earlier exhaustion seem insignificant. 12 massive men emerged where the wolves had been. Era's face burned with sudden mortifying heat. They were naked, all of them, and she immediately averted her gaze, staring hard at the stone floor. Her cheeks flamed hot enough to chase away the lingering cold. "Please stay." The voice was deep, authoritative, resonating with a power that made her bones vibrate. A command, but somehow also a request. She turned back slowly, carefully keeping her eyes trained on faces and nothing lower. The warriors were all powerfully built, all bearing the scars of countless battles, all with various shades of gray and white hair that marked them as elite northern wolves. But it was the alpha, the one she'd called stubborn, whose head had rested in her lap, whose infected wound she'd cleaned, who commanded every bit of her attention. He was towering, easily 6'7", with dark hair heavily streaked with silver that fell to his shoulders. His amber gold eyes were even more piercing in human form, intelligent and assessing and alive with something that might have been amusement. His body was a warrior's masterpiece, heavily muscled, covered in scars that told stories of survival, radiating a presence that announced clearly, here was someone who ruled kingdoms. He moved toward her with predatory grace despite his recent injuries, and Era's instinct was to shrink back. But she held her ground, kept her chin up even as her Omega wolf whimpered its submission. "My name is Kieran Volkov," he said, and his voice wrapped around her like velvet over steel. "Alpha King of the Northern Dominion." He gestured to the 11 warriors behind him, all now standing in a loose formation that was still unmistakably military. "This is my Praetorian Guard," his amber gold eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And you, little Omega, just saved all our lives." Panic flooded through Era like ice water. She'd been petting him. She'd called the Alpha King stubborn. She'd sung him lullabies like he was a common injured wolf, instead of the most powerful and feared ruler in all the territories. Kings executed wolves for less than such disrespect. I'm sorry," she stammered, dropping immediately into a deeper bow. "I didn't know. I didn't mean any disrespect. Most wolves would have fled from one injured Praetorian, let alone 12. The voice came from her left, the silver-furred wolf, now a broad-shouldered man with silver-gray hair and sharp, intelligent features. His stance marked him clearly as the beta, the squad leader. "You ran toward danger to help strangers. That's not disrespect, Omega. That's extraordinary courage." Kieran's gaze never left her face. "What's your name?" "Era." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "And why were you wandering alone in a storm, Era? Why were you dying in the mountains?" She hesitated, shame burning through her. But there was no point in lying to the Alpha King. "I was rejected, exiled from Shadowmere Pack this morning. My intended mate declared me cursed, an abomination. Said I'd taint his bloodline. The Alpha banished me immediately. The reaction was instantaneous. Several of the guards growled, low and threatening. The Beta Rocco, she remembered from stories, took a step forward, his expression thunderous. "Appearance-based rejection violates Northern law," he snarled. "That's grounds for territorial challenge and Alpha removal." "It doesn't matter," Era said quickly, wrapping her arms around herself. "I have nowhere to go anyway. No pack. No family. I was walking to die, and then I found you. And I couldn't," her voice cracked, "I couldn't just let you die. Even knowing what you are, what your king could do to me for interfering." Kieran moved closer with fluid, predatory grace that made her breath catch. He was overwhelming up close, his presence pushing at her Omega instincts in ways that made her want to simultaneously run and submit. "You found us when we were dying," he said, his voice pitched low but carrying absolute authority. "You knew exactly what herbs we needed for Wolf's Bane poisoning. You positioned us for optimal heat sharing in ways that require tactical understanding. You sang healing songs, ancient ones, that strengthened our spirits and kept us anchored when we wanted to slip away." His amber gold eyes seemed to see straight through her. "That wasn't just training, Era. That was the Soul Weaver gift awakening." She blinked. "The what?" "A gift lost for over 400 years. The ability to sense and heal not just physical wounds but spiritual ones. To find those in desperate need and know instinctively how to save them." He stepped closer still, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "I've been searching for 3 years for a Luna meeting impossible requirements. Compassion to heal enemies without question, courage to face death without breaking, resilience to survive soul-crushing rejection and still help others, and the Soul Weaver gift." His hand reached out, fingers gentle as they lifted her chin. "You are everything I've been searching for. Everything the prophecy promised. I don't understand. You are my Luna." It wasn't a request or a question. It was a declaration, absolute and unshakable. "The Moon Goddess led you to us for this purpose. She marked you, tested you, and guided you here to save us so we could bring you home." Behind him, the entire Praetorian Guard moved as one, pounding their right fists against their chests in a gesture of acknowledgement and acceptance that echoed through the ancient stone chamber like thunder. Aira stared at them, at him, her mind unable to process what was happening. From rejected and cursed to claimed by the Alpha King himself, all in the span of one impossible night. "I need time," Aira said, her voice shaking. I went from exiled and waiting to die to being claimed as Luna in less than 12 hours. I need to understand what this means." Kieran studied her with those penetrating amber gold eyes, then nodded once. "You'll come to my territory, see the Dominion, meet my pack, understand what you're being offered before you fully accept." His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "But understand this, Aira. My claim isn't negotiable. You are my Luna. The only thing I'm giving you control over is the timing of your acceptance." The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened her. Instead, it sent warmth spreading through her chest, the first time anyone had claimed her as theirs, and meant it as protection rather than ownership. The 4-day journey through brutal mountain passes taught Aira more about the Praetorian Guard than any story ever could. They moved with synchronized precision despite still healing, and they treated her with a deference that left her constantly off balance. Rocco, the silver-haired beta, appointed himself her personal guardian, walking beside her and steadying her when the terrain grew treacherous. Thorn, the tracker with hawk-sharp eyes, always ranged ahead, ensuring their path was safe. Flint, the weapons master, carried an arsenal that seemed impossible for one man, and spent evenings teaching her basic knife defense, just in case. Ash, the combat medic, checked everyone's healing progress with gentle efficiency, and praised Aira's work, saving them with genuine admiration. Ridge, the strategist, walked with Kieran, constantly analyzing threats. Granite handled demolitions and had a booming laugh that echoed off mountainsides. Steel, the interrogator, rarely spoke but watched everything with unnerving intensity. Iron, the architect, pointed out defensive advantages in every landscape. Blade moved like living shadow, the guard's assassin. Storm predicted weather changes with uncanny accuracy, while Wolf, the youngest at barely 30, managed the warhounds with patient skill. They told her about the ambush, a coalition of 5 enemy packs attempting to assassinate Kieran and throw the Dominion into chaos. They'd been outnumbered, poisoned, left for dead. "You didn't just save 12 warriors," Rocco said quietly on the second day. "You prevented a civil war that would have killed thousands." On the third night, after the others had strategically given them privacy around the campfire, Kieran asked about Shadowmere. So Aira told him everything: the Omega House, the whispers, the years of being unwanted, Damien's brutal rejection. She laid bare every wound, every moment she'd believed the curse was real. When she finished, Kieran took her hand, his touch gentle despite his warrior's calluses. "You're not cursed," he said with fierce conviction. "You're marked by the moon goddess herself. That's why they feared you. Aira, they recognized power they couldn't understand or control. Your appearance, your instincts, your gift, it was all destiny manifesting. Shadowmere was too blind to see it." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "But I see you. I see exactly what you are and what you're meant to become." When they finally crested the last mountain pass on the 4th day, Aira's breath caught. Iron Peak Citadel rose from the mountain itself, a massive fortress carved from living stone. Ice and rock merged into architecture that looked both ancient and eternal. It was beautiful, imposing, and utterly magnificent. The pack that emerged numbered in the hundreds, all moving with warrior discipline. But instead of fear or disgust at her appearance, their faces showed awe. An elderly woman pushed through, white-haired, bent with age, but eyes blazing with recognition. She approached Aira directly, placed weathered hands on her face, and smiled through sudden tears. "The Soul Weaver has returned," Moira whispered, her voice carrying. "After 400 years of waiting, the prophecy is fulfilled." The entire pack dropped into bows of respect, and Aira felt something fundamental shift inside her. She was home. Over the following weeks, Kieran courted Aira with an intensity that was both patient and unmistakable. He showed her the Dominion from mountain peaks where eagles nested, the vast territory spreading below them like a kingdom of ice and stone. He introduced her to pack members who bowed with genuine respect rather than obligation, who asked for her blessing on newborns and her insight on disputes. He included her in war councils where hardened warriors listened as she suggested diplomatic solutions they hadn't considered. Her unique perspective, years of navigating hostility, proving invaluable. He trained her in Luna duties personally: pack law, territorial management, alliance negotiations, never pushing physically, never demanding intimacy, but making his claim clear in every protective gesture, every possessive glance, every time he positioned himself between her and potential threat. She learned the prophecy from Moira one evening. 3 years ago, the seer had declared Kieran would find his Luna, marked by death but carrying life, rejected by the blind but chosen by the goddess. He'd met countless Omegas after that, beautiful, accomplished, eager to be queen. None had the gift. None had been her. "I'd almost given up," Kieran admitted one night as they walked the citadel battlements under starlight. "Started to think maybe the prophecy was wrong, or I'd misunderstood. Then my guard and I were ambushed, poisoned, left dying in that ancient fortress." His amber gold eyes found hers. "And the moon goddess sent me you." Era fell in love, not with the Alpha King, but with Kieran the man. She watched him settle disputes with strategic brilliance tempered by mercy. Saw him training with young warriors, patient with their mistakes. Witnessed his fierce protection of the weak orphans, elderly, the injured, ensuring none went without. He commanded absolute loyalty, but gave it equally in return. Would die for any member of his pack without hesitation. And he looked at her like she was precious. Like her silver-white hair was beautiful, rather than cursed. Like her pale skin glowed instead of appearing corpse-like. Like her storm-gray eyes held wisdom instead of bad omens. But the fear never fully left. Late at night, alone in her chambers, Era waited for the inevitable moment when Kieran would realize his mistake. When he'd see what Shadowmere had seen, a cursed Omega who brought misfortune. When he'd reject her like Damien had. And this time it would destroy her because she'd made the fatal mistake of hoping. Moira found her in the healing sanctuary one afternoon, tears streaming silently down her face as she organized herbs she'd already organized twice. "You're waiting for him to reject you," the old seer said bluntly, settling beside her. Era's hand stilled. "Everyone else did. Why would he be different?" "Child." Moira took her face in weathered hands, forcing eye contact. "You weren't abandoned during that blood moon you were placed. The moon goddess herself orchestrated your entire life to lead you here, to him, to save those 12 warriors so they could bring you home. But the curse was divine purpose manifesting." Moira's grip tightened. "You think the Soul Weaver gift comes without a price? You were marked visibly so you couldn't hide, couldn't blend in, had to walk the hard path that would forge you into the Luna this dominion needs. Shadowmere's blindness wasn't your failure, it was the goddess removing obstacles from your true path." The seer's eyes blazed with conviction. "Stop letting fear of the past blind you to the gift of the present. That man loves you. His pack reveres you. You are exactly where you're meant to be. The only thing standing between you and your destiny now is your own fear." Era's tears came harder, but this time they felt like release rather than grief. "What if I'm not strong enough? You saved 12 dying warriors with expired herbs and sheer determination." Moira smiled. "You're strong enough. You've always been strong enough. Now you just need to believe it." That night, Era walked to Kieran's war room with purpose in every step. Her hands weren't shaking. Her voice wouldn't waver. Moira was right, she'd spent 24 years surviving impossible circumstances. She was strong enough for this. Kieran and Rocco looked up from battle maps spread across the table as she entered. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice steady for the first time in her life. Rocco's knowing smile was immediate. "I'll just check the perimeter," he said, excusing himself and closing the door behind him with deliberate care. Kieran straightened. Amber gold eyes locked on her face with intensity that would have made her falter weeks ago. Now it only strengthened her resolve. "Yes," Era said simply. "I accept. Not just you, but all of this being your Luna, leading beside you, using my gift to heal the Dominion." She crossed to him, closing the distance between them. "I love you, Kieran. I love your strength and your strategy, and the way you see me as powerful instead of cursed. I love how you protect the weak and lead with both mercy and ruthlessness. I want to spend my life building something extraordinary with you." Kieran closed the remaining distance in 3 powerful strides, his hands cupping her face with surprising gentleness, before his mouth claimed hers in a kiss that was possessive and tender, and claiming all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've loved you since I woke in that fortress to find you bleeding and exhausted, still singing healing songs to keep my warriors alive," he said roughly. "You are the strongest wolf I've ever met, Ira, and you're mine. Finally, completely mine." The mating ceremony was held 3 weeks later under a blood moon, the same lunar phase under which Era had been found as an infant. She wore silver silk and gray furs that seemed woven from storm clouds themselves, her silver-white hair adorned with moonflowers that glowed in the crimson moonlight. She looked like a storm goddess incarnate, ethereal and powerful and utterly magnificent. The 12 Praetorian guards stood as honor witnesses in formal black armor, Rocco at Kieran's right hand. The entire Dominion assembled to watch their king claim his prophesied Luna. When Kieran marked her before them all, his teeth sinking into the junction of her neck and shoulder in the ancient claiming ritual, Aera's soulweaver gift manifested visibly for the first time. Silver light exploded from her in waves, flowing outward to touch every wolf present, healing old wounds that had never quite closed, strengthening pack bonds that had frayed, soothing traumas that had festered in darkness. The proof of her divine purpose, visible and undeniable. The pack howled in celebration, thousands of voices joining in a song of joy and acceptance that echoed off the mountains. Even the blood moon seemed to shine brighter, as if the moon goddess herself was smiling. Years later, Luna Queen Aera sat in her healing sanctuary with a young Omega who bore scars too similar to her own, rejected, exiled, convinced she was fundamentally broken. "I wasn't cursed," Aera said, taking the girl's trembling hands. "I was chosen. The moon goddess marks some of us with visible difference so we can't hide, can't blend in, must walk the hard path that leads to our true purpose." She smiled. "Being rejected by Shadowmere didn't break me. It freed me to find the Dominion. Saving those 12 warriors wasn't luck. It was destiny testing whether I had the heart to lead." She squeezed the girl's hands with fierce conviction. "Your rejection isn't punishment, it's redirection. Your difference isn't a flaw, it's your power waiting to be recognized. Trust that the moon goddess sees you, values you, and is guiding you toward wolves who will celebrate what others feared." Aera pulled the girl into an embrace. "Your true pack is waiting. You just have to be brave enough to keep walking until you find them. And when you do, every moment of pain will make sense. Every rejection will reveal itself as the goddess clearing your path to where you truly belong." The young Omega left standing taller, hope replacing despair in her eyes. And Aera watched her go, remembering a storm, 12 dying wolves, and the night everything changed. Sometimes the goddess's greatest gift was a closed door because it meant the right one was about to open. If you enjoyed Aera and Kieran's story of rejection transforming into destiny, please subscribe to this channel for more Alpha King romances, rejected mate redemption stories, and powerful Omega tales that celebrate the strength it takes to keep walking through the storm. Every story I create is about wolves who were told they were too much or not enough, who were cast aside by those too blind to see their worth, and who discovered that rejection was simply the moon goddess redirecting them toward their true purpose. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. I post new werewolf romance stories regularly, each one exploring themes of second chances, fated mates, and the truth that our deepest wounds often mark us for our greatest destinies. Leave a comment below sharing your own journey from rejection to acceptance. Have you ever been cast aside by people who couldn't recognize your value? Have you walked through your own storm only to discover it was leading you exactly where you needed to be? Your story matters, and this community is here to remind you that you're not alone. We've all felt like outsiders. We've all questioned whether we were somehow fundamentally wrong. And we've all discovered that the right people, our true pack, celebrate the very differences others feared. Your support means everything, and helps me create more content celebrating powerful truths. That being rejected by the wrong pack means you're being saved for the right one. That visible differences are often signs of invisible gifts, and that the moon goddess never makes mistakes even when her plan feels cruel in the moment. And remember this, always. You are not too much, you are not too little. You are not too pale, too dark, too quiet, too loud, too strange, or too different. You are exactly who you're meant to be. Your rejection wasn't the end of your story, it was the beginning of your true one. Your curse is actually your gift in disguise. Your storm is leading you home. See you in the next story.